Well, let's talk a little bit about what specific kinds of programming we're really talking about. We're talking about a rise in attendance at programming at libraries. But what kinds of services and programming are libraries providing now that they didn't before, or that are becoming more popular that they did provide before? And why are libraries the right place to host those kinds of community services?
Well, I actually think that our more traditional programs are also on the right. So like our book discussion groups, author events. People are reading more today than in different points in our history, and they're reading in lots of different formats. And I think the library has been a great convener of those conversations. And so we actually see more demand than we've seen previously in sort of traditional. But on the other side, we're as the world of information changes, we found that sometimes an author talk without format isn't the most effective way of sharing ideas. And we've started to experiment with different, facilitating learning through experience. And one example is it was a short-term project in Chicago where we wanted to explore the questions around advanced manufacturing as it relates to the city wanting to sort of think about being a leader in manufacturing. So we opened a lab where you can 3D print, explore, seeing various different pieces of advanced manufacturing. And what we were surprised by is there was a big community that immediately sort of showed up at the library that had been using us before. And it was a really effective way of exposing people to those technologies that are very hard to describe in any other way other than doing. And so increasingly we're looking at ways in the library of how we can expose people to leading ideas through experience and programs like that, as opposed to just more traditional ways of exposing people through print.
Sommer, may I ask a question to my
Please,
fellow panelists? Yeah. Brian, I saw your awesome innovation lab, which I assume is that one up by the main entrance where it looked like it had 3D printers and so forth in it. Would you imagine that you'll have 3D printers in there perpetually, or is the idea that you will always have what is the new edge of some form of innovation in there? I'm
glad you asked that, because actually the lab concept is really intended to experiment with various different approaches. So it's the project actually has been extended, but we hadn't intended for it to be. It was supposed to be a 6-month experiment. We do not believe that Chicago Public Library's role is to be the 3D printing hub for the city. In fact, we think the private sector will do that. But we think it's an interesting place for people to be exposed to this technology that many believe is a game changer in so many different industries. We think it's possible that on our public computers, since we have the largest footprint of public access in the city, that we may want to be put on our basic offerings some of these 3D software programs. But no, we actually don't want the lab to continue in that function. In fact, we've already started to do lab projects related to data visualization and big data to help people understand what's available and how to adapt and use those data. So we have a whole laundry list of lab projects. And actually, this is actually taking a note from Franklin that he's noted with one of the early concepts of American public libraries, where you sort of take your private libraries and make them available to a larger group through the subscription model. And when he did that, actually, what many people don't know is that in addition to having all of those collections, he was also doing experiments. And so he was experimenting with electricity and various different leading technologies of the day right there in the library. And we think that, at least in Chicago, that's an interesting place for the library to be, is to expose people to these leading technologies, these new ways of learning, but doing it in an experimental way.
Yeah, I think the libraries of the future, it's hard to talk about them sort of separately from how you talk about what places in the future are going to be like. Whether it be in cities or in rural areas or whatever, so that the library as institution, schools as institutions, zoos as institutions, museums as institutions, they're all changing, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot of iteration as we move towards the future about what might the library, any of these institutions be, and what role they play in the way that residents and community members organize themselves or take advantage of the kinds of services that institutions provide. It was interesting, I was at a session yesterday, who will determine the marketplace of the future, and there was a lot of joking about librarians, which was really interesting because some of the panel members were talking about how sort of algorithm is the king or queen, right? Really the only way to get anything done right and I'm exaggerating a little bit, right, is to really query through an algorithm. And librarians can't be an algorithm, right? But that's the beauty of it, right? Because the intersection of the analytics that come from algorithm and the humanness that comes from a person that's really going to make sense of that for you is, I think, the most important thing to think about in terms of libraries of the future or any institution of the future.